Okay. Hello, everyone. Good day to everyone. Am I audible and visible? If some of you can just put in the chat box. Good. So, very warm welcome to this very interesting webinar. And I must say that I'm doing this kind of webinar, this topic for the first time. Just for the people who don't know me, I'm Dr. Namrata. I am a pediatrician by my qualification. I've seen patients and have been a part of the healthcare. Then I became a medical writer about 15 years back and founded Curacause about 10 years back. And I'm heading a team of medical writers, graphic designers, and I work around medical communications and scientific communications. Now, the reason why I thought of having this webinar and this specific topic, there is a lot of I would say interest in the involvement of patient, whether it is in clinical trials or it is in other drug development stages, as well as when the product reaches the market and when we have to educate the patient for successful healthcare outcomes. The role of patients, the patient is patient or caregiver or anybody, in that sense of it can be patient advocacy also. So all that is becoming very important now because of all the solutions which we have. We have to somewhere, match it with what the patients need. So we thought of having this webinar where we're going to talk about how are we going to get the patient at the table. We are providing solutions, we are providing communication for the patients, but is the patient involved in all the decision making in all the stages that we are working on from the beginning itself? So that's where this topic is interesting, and that is where the importance of this topic is there. Now, just to give you a brief, outline of what we will be discussing today, obviously we want to understand what is patient centricity. We all talk of centricity, we all talk of inclusivity, but what does it mean in real life? And when, we are dealing with them, how do we kind of involve with them, engage with them, and how do we bring them, at the center? Second part of the session is going to be, there are certain guidelines which talk about patient centricity and inclusivity, and the only reason why I have included these guidelines are just to kind of validate the whole issue here, the whole topic, that it's not only that we are talking about it. There is a buzz. This is a buzzword which is there, but even the regulatory bodies, even the compliance agencies are asking for it and they are looking for it. And the third part is going to be, what is the role of patient when we talk of patient, especially in scientific communication, because that is what I work on. That is what my expertise is, and I just wanted to bring that also in the discussion, that where does a patient enter when we are actually communicating, whether it is in the form of a patient leaflet or maybe some educational material which we are preparing. So I'm going to start with, this is my personal experience, and I'm talking about my mom here. She's my mother, and she recently underwent a knee replacement surgery about 2 months back. It was in one of the premium hospitals in New Delhi. The doctor was very renowned, had many years of experience, and the surgery was done, a robotic surgery. The patient was made ambulatory, I think, on the second day itself. So second day she was made to walk in the room. Third day she was climbing the stairs. So that successful it was, and was discharged on day 5 and was on prophylactic antibiotics. Now, what happened? So once she reached home, there was physiotherapy which had to be done. About physiotherapy, the doctor was very particular about it, that since it is knee replacement, you have to take care of it. And I was told a lot of things about physiotherapy. That was the only thing which I took home with me when I took my mother home. Now, what happened after that? She had, very mild symptoms of abdominal pain, mild fever. She had a Foley's catheter while she was in the hospital. So she developed UTI, urinary tract infection, about 7 to 8 days in the post-operative phase while at home, and then she consulted another doctor and she lives in a city which is very close to New Delhi, so she could not come and visit the hospital, could not visit the doctor who had operated on her. And there they did this the culture sensitivity of a urine. They suspected it is UTI. They found out that the antibiotic which she was on, which was given to her as a prophylactic when she was discharged, that was resistant. So then they changed the antibiotic, and anyway, she did manage to get better. But during that time, while all these tests were going on, the antibiotics were being changed, she was like kind of bedridden. She's 80-year-old. She does not have too much of immunity. Her own health is not that well, and she developed poor appetite. There was generalized weakness, and she's a very active person, and she became very I would say very depressed, and she was not enjoying her life, not having food, not talking to people. And anyway, she became better. And it took about a month or so for her to regain her strength and became better. Now, why I'm telling you this example here, or this story here, is now she's very scared to undergo the same surgery on her second knee. So that is what the doctor had advised her. So she has problem in both her knees. One knee was more than the other one. So one she got operated, but then the second one she's too scared. And though I told her, I've tried to convince her, I've tried to counsel her that no, this is not the case, and next time it's not going to be like this. But still, as a patient, she actually somewhere, she connects what happened to her after the operation to the operation, which is actually, they're two different things. So if you ask me, as a doctor, the operation was successful because she's able to be more mobile. She's able to do her daily activities in a better way. She can climb stairs, and her mobility has obviously increased, and that was the purpose of the operation. But the whole experience of having a UTI post-operatively, which is a very, very common infection in old elderly people who have Foley's catheter while they're in the hospital. So that has somewhere, has that effect on her, where she feels that, no, I don't want to again, go through the whole experience. Now, in this case, I'm just going to ask you a question here. What should have been different in the patient care in this case now? So there are four options. Patient should not have been discharged on day 5 and kept for a longer period. The antibiotic given at discharge should have been different. Probably they should have done a urine culture while the patient was in the hospital, just to ensure that whether she has any, resistance, and how is the sensitivity of the strain. A follow-up call from the doctor or hospital staff was desirable to check on the patient's health when she reached home. And the fourth is adequate patient caregiver education was necessary at discharge on what to do in case the patient develops symptom like UTI, because having UTI in any elderly patient while in the hospital is very common. So I want all of you to vote for this. Now you will have you would be seeing the options there. So if all of you can just vote. And just to tell everybody, if you have questions in between the session, there is a question and answer mode in your chat box. Just go there and put your questions there, and I'll be taking up all the questions at the end of the session. So this example is actually important from a perspective of when, as healthcare professionals, as maybe scientists or medical writers, or whoever we all are, we are there in this group today. It is not only important to understand science, to understand medicine, and go ahead and treat a patient, but it is also equally important to involve the patient in discussions from the beginning. And when we are kind of the technology wise, we have become so advanced now. If you talk about, so the surgery which was conducted on her, it was robotics, and they told me everything about physics and why it is important. This is precision surgery. That is why we are doing it. And obviously the costs and everything are much higher than any regular surgery. But the problem which it led to was something which was very simple, very easy to manage, very easy to control. And if the patient would have known about it, that this is going to happen after her surgery, she would have been better prepared for it. So fine, so we have the responses now. And majority of you have opted for option 4. Yes, so that is obviously important. And I think the other options are also somewhere they are relevant, but maybe I would not place them as number one option here. Number one option I would definitely consider here as a very adequate patient caregiver education, where whatever is necessary at discharge and what care she had to take while she was at home, everything should have been conveyed to her, or maybe people who were looking after her caregivers, so that they would have been better prepared and better equipped to deal with this. Now, going to the next, now just to understand what is patient centricity here. Now, obviously, the name is self explanatory. We are keeping the patient in the center. So, we have the patient, and throughout the treatment, throughout the whatever we are doing, whether it is diagnosis, whether it is treatment, throughout the patient journey. So, putting the patient first, so it's not about what treatment are we giving. It is not about who's going to be treating, which hospital the patient is going, but then what is convenient for the patient, prioritizing the patient's needs, what are their preferences, and then also their experiences. So every patient might have a different experience from a previous interaction with a doctor, with a hospital. So that also has to be considered when we are talking to a patient, and when we are managing the health of a patient. Now, some of the dimensions of patient-centered care. So when we say patient, this is a very diverse group which we are talking of. Now, when we talk about doctors, I would say I think 90% of what we study in our medical school is uniform, throughout any country where you have done your education in. There may be some local laws which may be different, some regulations which may be different, but generally the medicine and science, that stays the same. But when we talk of a patient, there is a lot of, I would say, the spectrum is very wide. There is knowledge difference, the literacy of a patient related to health literacy. I'm not talking about, the educational background, but also how well they are aware about their health and the health literacy itself, the beliefs and values. It can be, ethnicity, cultural aspects. So there are so many varied, parameters here which we have to consider, and which we have to take care of when we are talking to them, when we are working with them, or when we are engaging with them. Now, the information what we share with them, it has to start from the beginning of the patient journey. It cannot be that we have done a part of whatever activity we had to do with them. Suppose we take an example of a clinical research. Now, patient is enrolled in a clinical research. We do take the informed consent forms. We explain everything to them. We make them sign the informed consent forms. But do we also convey and communicate to them throughout the clinical trial, and frequently, or how much of confidence do we give to them to reach out to us with their queries, with their doubts, with their fear? So all this has to be kind of considered when we are talking to patients, when we are dealing with patients. Then there are collaborations which are very important. So patient is one part of a jigsaw puzzle. So it's not, he or she is not the only one, doctor is not the only one. So you have sponsors, you have healthcare professionals, you have hospital, you have insurance, you have reimbursement agencies. There's so many others also who are a part of this whole healthcare scenario. So the collaboration has to be there, among all these stakeholders. And then the patient has to actively participate in the decision making. Now, what treatment is being given to them, what diagnostic tool is being used, what options are available, and the patient has to actively participate in his or her treatment. Now, why is patient centricity? Why are we talking about this? Focus is shifting to value. So if you see these, there are two things on two sides. So you have treating disease. So it is not only treating disease now, but the focus is on overall health. So you might have treated the disease in this example, in this case, but then the patient got scared and the patient is not ready to take up the next surgery, which is also essential for her, which is also essential for treating her disease, or maybe her, I would not call that a disease, but a medical ailment. Managing costs. Now, rather than managing cost, we want to shift it from managing cost to optimizing the value. And patient is not a passive caretaker now. The patient has to be, they have to own their health. They have to be active caretakers and be involved in the decisions what are being taken, what are being made for them. And rather than having a fragmented care where sometimes we involve patients, sometimes we don't, it is a complete care path where patient has to be involved at each step, at each stage, and educated along with it, and the awareness has to increase. Now it is going to be difficult. It is obviously difficult when you try to, because we speak in a very scientific and a medical understanding. We know what the complications are, we know the percentages which are there, we know the safety efficacy of any treatment, but when you have to convey it to a patient, it has to be conveyed in a way in which you are balancing the benefit and the risk. Now, if we are only talking about the risks there, obviously the patient is not going to come ahead and take the treatment. Or else, if we are only talking about the benefits, that this treatment is very good for you, and then something happens wrong during the treatment, that can happen with anyone. So then the patient or the attendants or the caregivers may not be mentally prepared for all that. So the balance is very important here. Now, the four pillars of patient centricity. So when we talk about a holistic patient centric strategy, so we have to understand the patient. The patient may be different if they are from which country, which culture, which ethnicity, maybe small town or maybe a metropolitan city, the educational background of a patient, or maybe they have certain doctors or healthcare professionals as relatives, or they as their family members who can talk on their behalf. So we have to understand the patient, that we have to listen to them. Now, understanding the patient actually brings us to listening to the patient, rather than just conveying what we think is right for them, what we think is the best solution for them. We have to listen to them, that we should listen to what they're saying, how they are explaining their problems, what fear do they have, make them comfortable, make them kind of gain that trust with them. Second is, what are the needs of a patient? Now, every patient has a different need, and the need will depend on the functions that the patient has to do in their daily lives. So if it is somebody maybe who's an athlete, they may be, so there for them agility is important, for them how they're using their how fast they are running, that all becomes important. Now, if it is somebody who's a painter, so maybe then whether that treatment is going to have an impact on how he or she is holding their brush, or maybe how they are seeing the colors. So if it's an eye surgery which is being done with them, so is it going to have an impact on the color vision? So there's so many different things which we have to consider. So it is just not about treatment, that this is a treatment, this is good for you, go ahead and take it. No, we have to listen to patient. We have to meet their needs, whatever needs they have, according to their profession, according to their daily activities, what they're involved in, and connect with the patients. Now, the connection with the patient is an ongoing process. There is nothing like during the treatment connect with them twice or connect with them thrice. So there are certain patients who are very I would say well read, they are aware of it, they might have undergone the treatment before, and they are much better placed as compared to somebody who's undergoing the treatment for the first time. So all this depends upon how frequently, how much the connection, how frequently the connection has to be with them. And lastly, engage with the patients. So engaging is, kind of a to and fro communication, conversation, which we have to have with them, which we have to develop with them. It is never a one-sided, I would say, download of information, download of treatment, which we are giving to them. Now, we spoke about patient centricity, what it is, what it involves, what all factors are there. Now, in one snapshot, there are so many different regulatory guidelines are there, compliance bodies are there. So FPI is for the European Pharmaceutical Association, ABPI is for UK. Then there are the regulatory agencies, FDA and EMA, FDA for US, EMA for Europe, and CDER is again for US drug approvals. Now, all of them, what is the common thing here, as you can see on the slide, it is they have to be fully informed. So they should know everything about their treatment. They have to be active partners in decision making at all levels of health system. So whether it is at a prophylactic phase or at a treatment or maybe, in a convalescence phase, wherever it is, wherever the patients are involved, they have to be, kind of active partners in the decision making. Also, they have also kind of, they have stats, they have data which say that if the healthcare professionals industry, they work with patients and patient organizations, it is going to bring forward a significant public health benefit. So it is not only the patient who's going to be happy, but also the whole healthcare system, the whole environment around it. There is going to be a better, patient outcome, maybe less complications. The dissatisfaction is going to be less. There is going to be a better adherence to the treatment. So there are so many factors which will be a part of it, which kind of, will bring about significant public health benefits. Now, for the regulatory decisions, now we might think that, regulatory decisions should be taken by regulatory agencies or people who have more experience. But then they also say that, you should now when you are developing a product, the product has to be relevant for the person who's going to use it. We should have enough, insights from that group, that whether they want such a product or not. Now, a product will be sold only if there are takers for that product. So in the interest of, I would say, even the business aspect of whatever the industry is doing, it becomes important that involve the patient's voice in drug development and regulatory decision. And it will go a long way in meeting their business goals, along with, obviously the patient is going to be better involved, we will have a better improved patient outcome. Now, kind of, I would say, when we are closing this loop, so we are talking of a patient journey. So it doesn't end with one treatment getting completed or with one disease being treated. Now, whatever experiences the patient has, I would say, faced throughout it, and the perspective, the insights, now all this is important to be kind of conveyed back from where this journey started. So the loop has to close, where we're involving the patient at every stage. And at the end of every journey, we take the insights from the patient, and then we kind of see what we would have done, what we could have done in a different way, so that the patient's experience and ultimately the patient outcome would have been better. Since I told you that, I'm a medical writer and I'm a scientific, I work a lot on scientific communication and how we are communicating. So now there are there is a new guideline which came up last year in September, which is Good Publication Practices 3 guidelines. And they have also mentioned, at various stages where all a patient can be involved. when we are talking of a very scientific document as a publication which is published in a journal. Now, patients, caregivers, and patient advocates, they can be a part of publication steering committees. Now, what are publication steering committees? They are committees who decide what to publish, where to publish, and and especially when we talk about rare diseases and chronic conditions. Now, a disease like asthma, a disease like hypertension, diabetes, or maybe rare diseases. Now, that is where the patient's experience actually has to be considered. If you're talking of a chronic condition, then the patient would have been living with that disease, with that condition for a very long period of time, and they might have some insights which can improve, which can enhance the patient care, the disease management, what we are doing. Now, patients may also evaluate the usefulness of publication. Now, how does this whole publication thing work? Now, there is a research, maybe there is a clinical trial which shows some positive results, and the researcher or the sponsor or the industry, they kind of they publish it in a journal. It gets published. Now, what happens? The publication in a scientific journal, the access is only to the people who are from science background or who are from medicine background. But now the journals are coming up with lay summaries, patient lay summaries, and lay language summaries, which they are writing, which is kind of summarizing what that research has conducted, what the outcome is, and what impact will it have on the patient care. So all this is where the patients are involved in, and they should be involved in. So they are, and also creating plain language summaries. Then the patients can also contribute as authors or maybe as contributors to publications. It all depends on what role they are playing, how much they are contributing, whether they can become an author or they can just be as a contributor, or they can be a name in the acknowledgement section. Now, this is a very important, I would say, milestone for all of us, where we know that having patient in the center is important, but then how do we bring them in the center? So these are certain areas where we can involve with them, we can bring them to the table, we can initiate the discussion with them. Now, what happens if we don't have patient in the center? Now, what's going to happen? So in this example, as you saw, the patient is not ready to take the surgery again. She's so scared of it. So somewhere we missed on something which could have a treatment which could have given to a patient. Maybe whatever time she has in which she can be ambulatory, we kind of restricted her with just one knee getting replaced. And also from a hospital point of view, I would say this is a business loss. The patient is not going to come again. And the biggest loss here would be she might talk to others in the community, and the others might get a kind of an understanding, or maybe some insights from her, and they might refrain from getting the surgery done or may delay it. So then each patient is an ambassador of a drug, is an ambassador of a treatment what we have given to him or her, and we have to consider that from the beginning till the end of the patient journey, that what they are going to say outside, and especially now when we have social media, when we have information which is freely available. So we have to be so very careful on how we are conveying and what is the perception which the patient is taking from us. Now, that this is obviously one part of it. Obviously, if we do not involve the patient in a product development stage or maybe in the designing stage, we may create or develop a product which the patients may not need, and then obviously the sales will not happen. The success of the company is not going to be there. Second point here, which is worth mentioning, is non-compliance to medication. Now, if we have not considered certain experiences or certain insights from the patient, and maybe done the same mistake again, the patient might not adhere with the treatment. Then there are certain patient factors, physician factors, medication factors, which will have an impact on poor healthcare outcomes. So we are talking about something which is very simple, but very critical. So sometimes, we think of very complex, we think of very difficult situations, we try to find solutions there. But this patient centricity and bringing the patient to the table and talking to them, listening to them, this is, I would say, the most simple aspect of healthcare delivery, which gets missed by many of us. And sometimes it may be because we have other expectations, or maybe we have other roles and responsibilities, and we feel that this is something very simple and it can take care of itself. No, it doesn't do that. So enough time has to be given to it, enough effort has to be put on this very simple but very important and very critical activity. Recently, I'm not sure how many of you have seen this. It's a documentary. It's a docu series on Netflix by the name of Diagnosis. I saw the first. I would say the first part of it a couple of days back, and really, it's a very interesting concept. So I thought of including that in this talk today. So it's actually about a person. Her name is Dr. Lisa Sanders. She's a columnist from the New York Times. And what she does is, so she normally writes columns on various healthcare related, topics and issues around it. Now, what this series shows us, so they have they have actually connected, they have certain patients who have not been diagnosed by their doctors, by their hospital, and they are still searching for diagnosis. Now this is, we're talking of something where the patient is maybe might be having excruciating pain or is not able to sleep. So the one which I saw, the it was a girl, 20-year-old girl, who had myopathy, and she had extreme pain, and she was a very athletic person. So because of that pain, she was not able to do what she wanted to do. She was not able to go on hiking, and she had and the doctors were not able to diagnose her. The doctors were not able to diagnose her. Now what this series shows, and what they have tried to do here is, they took a video of the patient talking about what her problem is. And Dr. Lisa, in her column, and they created a crowd. So through social media, this video was shared, the article was shared, which is the patient's own story of what she's facing and what all tests have been done, and everything in a very patient's own experience and their own language. So it is shared. Then what happens after this is, there are people who connect with the patient, who talk to her. They can be other patients who actually have a similar symptom, and then they tell that that this is this I'm also facing, and this is a diagnosis which I have. There are hospitals which reach out to the patient to say that we have treated a similar kind of disease, and why don't you come to us. So in this case, the episode which I had seen, one of the hospitals in Italy actually responds to her, and then they say that we do have the test which we can do, and then they kind of finally diagnose her. And then after the diagnosis, the management was something which was very simple, which was a diet restriction. So it was a kind of a fatty acid enzyme deficiency which she had, and just by managing her diet, she could reduce her episodes which she was having. So if what I'm trying to say here is, in this episode, so this is where we understand the power of having patient at the center. Now the patient was living in one of the very advanced cities in US, with the best healthcare which was available to her, and still her condition was not getting diagnosed. So these things can happen to any one of us. But what is important here is, and what is, I would say, very the intriguing point here is, that other patients and other doctors who have different experience, they can pitch in, and and they can come, and it can be in collaborative intelligence which comes here, and which kind of responds, and a solution is found to a problem which might be kind of, the doctor who was treating the patient might feel that I don't have an answer for this, and I don't know how to treat it. So this is actually what we call it as design thinking. You would have heard design thinking in so many other fields. whether it is technology or it is, anything like automation, AI, everywhere this term is there. But now we're talking of design thinking, where we are keeping the patient in the center. We are listening to the patient, we are hearing their experiences, plus spreading it to others who might have a similar experience, and then just learning from there, and kind of taking the healthcare ahead and taking the treatment management ahead from there. Now, once we have, kind of, I would say, confirmed that why patient centricity is important, what all happens there. Now, what happens? What are the challenges? Now, I'm talking of this. Why do you think we have this topic, and why do you think we are discussing this? Because there are certain challenges in adapting this patient centricity. Now, there are various factors. So there is, external factors, among which the most common is lack of patient and provider trust. Patients may not trust the provider, and they may not, engage in the conversation with them. They may not come up with all the fear, all the concerns which they have. Concerns regarding the privacy and security of patient data. This obviously is, another external factor which is very important to consider. Then prioritization. Are we prioritizing the reasons which are there, or the causes which are there, which are important for that patient, for that specific patient? Now, the prioritization cannot be a very general term here. So it is something where it is very patient specific, and you have to prioritize depending upon what the patient needs, what the patient requires. Obviously, there are a lot of, lack of guidelines which are there, which kind of somewhere comes in between, where we are not, sometimes, it is that this is something which we cannot share with the patient, or this information we cannot put on maybe on a public platform because of patient confidentiality. So different aspects which are there. Variations in guideline translation. So there is, translation. So when we talk of patient, they may be from so many different languages. And then there are lack of patient-centered terminology standards. So depending on what level of literacy the patient is, the terminologies have to be different. Now, then there are also measurements like insights or experiences. How do we kind of come up with, how do we measure whatever activities we have done, whether they have been, relevant or not, whether patient have been involved in it or not. And lastly, the implementation part of it. So the most common challenge here is going to be, once we have everything, we theoretically we know it is important. All of us know that, it should be done. Then what is stopping us? The implementation of the limited application of research and patient decision making. And also, when we are talking of clinical workflows in, various stages of when the patient actually undergoes treatment, or undergoes diagnosis, or whatever activities are being done with him or her, the activities are more from a perspective of the person who's conducting them, rather than for whom we are doing it. So these are some of the challenges which are there to adapt patient centricity. Now, the role of patient in healthcare, as you see, so it's very wide. So you have a patient who may give you insight on a product or a service design. That what should you design? What is the need of a patient? And is what we are preparing, or is what we are creating, relevant for them or not? Second is obviously the clinical research. We talk about, there is poor enrollment, patients are not showing up, there is missing follow-ups, they don't come up after some time, they discontinue the treatment in between. So all this happens because probably they are not aligned with the whole goal of the clinical research and what we are trying to do, and what impact will it have when we are going to kind of get the drug approved, or maybe get the drug to the market. Third, here I'm going to talk about publications. Obviously, when we are publishing science, when we are publishing medicine, what is in it for the patient here? So now what happens is, now these publications, they ultimately reach the public platforms as maybe some articles in newspapers, but by the time it reaches that stage, a couple of weeks or a couple of months would have passed before the research was published. Now, that is why the journals are trying to bring these patient lists. It's not yet mandatory, so it has become mandatory in the regulatory stage now, but not yet mandatory for the publications. But this is where I would stress on, I would put a lot of emphasis where if we as medical writers or as scientists working on various research and trying to write publication, we should always reach out to the journal and ask them, can we submit a lay summary also to you, so that more number of people can read it and more number of people can relate to the research what we have done. Then the next part here, the next point here is, like, we have these advisory board meetings where the industry talks about various problem areas, unmet needs which are there for further maybe product development or maybe any activity which they have to undertake. So now we do have a lot of requirements coming from our clients also to involve patients in advisory board, to listen to patients during this stage itself, which is more at a strategy level, where we are talking about strategy, where we are talking about any unmet need which is there. So it's kind of a good sign here. Lastly, obviously, whatever we are doing, whether it is a treatment modality or it is a product, or maybe if it's a service for a patient, which ultimately has to be consumed by the patient has to be educated about it. They have to be aware of it. And the awareness is not something which can happen with one article if we just write and we put up on a website, or maybe share with them on an email. It's an ongoing process which has to be there. So before the product comes to the market, you have to start with creating a buzz around it. So we've been doing this a lot with doctors. When we talk of key opinion leaders, we talk about people who are going to be prescribing the drug. A lot of focus is on that, but an equal amount of focus has to be on the patients who are going to be consuming that treatment, who are going to be consuming that product. And so the education part also becomes a ongoing process which has to be considered here. Now, some of the best practices when we talk about, so the topic of our webinar today was, how do we kind of convey the science to patients, and what are the best practices around it. So these are certain practices which we follow. So obviously the science has to be broken down into simpler terms which a patient can understand. There are certain I would say dictionaries which are out there which give these terms in case we are not able, if we are writing and we don't know about it. It's a separate skill which a medical writer or maybe a scientific writer develops on how to write for patient and how to write for lay persons. Second is addressing different learning styles at different literacy levels. Now, when we are educating, when we are creating content for patients, we have to consider their literacy level would be different, and accordingly the communication has to be modified. Obviously it has to be clear, it has to be concise. We cannot keep open ended information which the patient is not sure about, is not getting all the answers. And the formats can be anything what works. So it can be normal text, it can be audio, it can be video, it can be probably a virtual reality or augmented reality video. So formats, it all depends on for whom we are using it, whether they at their end do they have all these platforms which they have access to. And the last important point here is translations and native language content. Now, patients may not understand English always. I would say around 90-95% of content what we write is all in English, whether it is for journals or it is for regulatory agencies or it is for medical education for doctors. Normally, it's English that we talk. It is English in which we think and we convey. So there are so many native languages across the world. So this is a very important point here. And also the translations which are being done, they have to be done by a native language expert. It cannot be a kind of word to word translation what any tool might be doing, maybe a Google Translate or something like that. So it's not that simple. It is a very complex stage which has to be taken up with that that expertise. and that experience also of writing in these various languages. Now, how are we engaging patients to achieve patient-centric scientific communication? Now, there are 4 points which you see here. So, inclusion, assessment, reporting, and communication. Now, inclusion is that we are including the patient-centric outcomes. So, this is somewhere where we talk about the patient-reported outcomes, or maybe the experiences what they have, the insights what they are conveying. So that has to be included in the whole planning of what we have. Second is assessment. Now we have to assess the patients, maybe by surveys, conducting surveys or questionnaires, to assess their experience, to take their feedback on various aspects of the treatment and the care what is being given to them. Reporting. Now whatever information, whatever research is coming out with, it has to be reported. So reporting has to be done in lay language summary. There has to be transparency here. If I'm a patient, I'm a part of a clinical trial, I have a right to know that what results are coming out of this clinical trial, rather than just my part in it as a patient or as a subject. So patients have, they have to be involved in the reporting, the transparency of the information which is being collected throughout the product development. And effective communication. Now the term is very simple. Now what is effectiveness? How do we say that it is effective communication? If it meets with our goals, if it meets with what we are trying to do with the patient, so then we can call it as effective communication. Now EMA, actually there is a clinical trials information system, also known as CETIS, and this was launched in January 2022, and now they've made it mandatory that a lay summary and a technical summary is mandatory within 12 months of end of each clinical trial in adult. So once the clinical trials are over, the information, the results of that clinical trial has to be in a public domain in a lay language summary, as a lay language summary, within 12 months of the completion of the clinical trial. So there are certain guidelines which are there, and we have to follow them. And I think it's just a matter of time when all this will become a regular part of what we are doing. Now, this is a very, I would like to, end the session today with a very interesting example, which I read somewhere. So, children, this was specially for children, when the children were actually undergoing MRI for their diagnosis, they used to cry a lot, and the MRI centers had to sedate these children. So they had to have anesthetists who came, who sedated the children. And in case an anesthetist was not available that time, the MRIs had to be rescheduled. Now, what did GE do? So GE had these MRI centers, and one of their persons actually went to one center, and he saw that children were crying. They were very afraid of entering into a MRI machine, and the technicians were having a hard time managing, and a lot of effort was being wasted. A lot of money was getting spent on it. So what did they do? They worked with a design thinking company. The company's name was IDEA, and they actually worked on a kind of adventure series. So once the child comes to these MRI center, the technician who's going to be doing the MRI, they will involve the child into a game like an adventure series, where the child is the star. The child is the one who's starring in that adventure series, and throughout the whole process, the technician keeps on giving the child instructions, and the child is engaged, is engrossed in what he or she is listening from the technician. And then he does, or and they they do the whole test in a very in a very proper way, where there is no, that the child is not crying, and there is no cancellation of appointments. So this is the impact of something so simple. And but when you see the outcome, when you see the whole impact of it, it was something which is mind blowing, and which is which is very interesting and for us to take a lesson from. Now, coming to the last slide of the take home messages of the session today. Patient centricity focuses on patients' needs, preferences, and experiences. It does not focus on what product we have, what service we are giving, what treatment am I treating. So it has to start from the patient, where what the patient needs, what their preferences, and what their experiences have been in the past. Patient centricity is multidimensional. It's not something which is very simple. It cannot be one size fits all type of activity. So it deserves a multicentric approach. Shifting from treating a disease to value-based healthcare is where the whole healthcare is moving now, and that is where even we have to consider this design thinking approach to put the patient in the center. Now, what is a design thinking approach? What is the problem? And how do we find a solution to the problem is from where we start. Patient-centered communication is not one size fits all approach, because the literacy is different, the language is different, beliefs are different, culture is different. So obviously the communication also has to be aligned with all these differences, and patients should be brought to the center of scientific communication. Now, what all can they provide us? It's not about what we are doing to the patient, but this is about what the patients can give us. So they are the ones who have an upper hand here. They can give us insight, they can give us expert advice, they can review and validate the content communication which we have created. They can create content as authors. Now, I've been a medical writer for about 15 years now. And I think I've just been a part of patient education is a different matter, where, we have worked on a lot of patient education content. But there also, that content has been reviewed by maybe a medical team or a marketing team sitting in a company. I've not come across any patient education material being reviewed by a patient as to whether they have understood it properly or not. But now in last, I think a couple of years, I've been a part of some of the advisory boards where patient advocacy groups have been a part of it. Some publications where patients have, they're becoming not exactly authors, but I would say contributors. And also certain, education content where patient advocacy groups are participating in that, and they're telling us the needs, the gaps, what are there, and what we can where we can fulfill it. So though we've been talking about patient centricity for quite some time in clinical trials, I've been hearing this term for almost, I would say, 10 years now, that a patient centric approach. But still, when I come to just a minute. When I come to the actual delivery and the actual, activity, what we are doing as medical writers, as scientific communicators, we are not, I would not even put a 25 percentage here, maybe around 10%, 5 or 10% is what I would say, where we actually involve patient in any project or in any discussion with a project, with a patient. So this was the last slide, and I'm open for questions now. If any one of you have any questions, so we can just discuss them. Okay, so Bhagishi is asking that can you please elaborate a bit on patient involvement in product development and designing? So this is actually whether so when you're actually developing a product, you have to see whether this is needed by the patient or not. Now, if you're developing a product for diabetes, so we can have a group of patients who have diabetes and maybe have a discussion with them, ask them, if we have a product like this, do you think it is going to ease your life, or maybe help you with your management of your disease? So that type of feedback and insights we can get. Now, once we have a prototype which is created, once we have a sample which is created, then give it to them and ask them to use it, and then come back with their feedback, with their insights on how is it designing, and whether they would want to make any changes there. So that is how we can involve the patient at this stage. So Omoni is asking, building on the previous question, ahead of having access to participants through the clinical trial, how can pharmaceuticals involve potential participants in the clinical trial design process, ensuring the trial design will be appropriate to the target population? I think the same, I would say the basics will be the same. So when you are creating a trial design, so you have the randomization, what has to be there, which groups are there, how are you going to kind of implement the intervention, and how are you going to be treating them. So all this we can always discuss with the patients before the protocol is finalized and before we reach a stage where the trial is actually started. So this can happen before the trial is started, when we are at a protocol stage where we can share the protocol with the patients and have a discussion with them about the design process. And if we get feedback at that stage, we can have protocol amendments done during that stage if we feel that there is a certain, activity which is not very patient friendly, or patient are not very comfortable in getting that treatment or that mode of treatment to them. So it has to be done before. Once you are in the clinical trial, once the trial has started, then what we can do is take feedback, take experiences of the patient, and maybe, if it is something which can be modified, which can amend the protocol, then go ahead and do that. And if not, then maybe probably, that can be a learning for the subsequent clinical trials. Can participants of clinical trials be involved in the drug development process? So this is what we're talking of when we say patient centricity. We're talking of giving a voice to the patient to talk about, how they have experienced, what their experiences have been, what their insights have been, and that itself helps you in the development process. So the drug development process, obviously the patient is not going to be a part of the drug development process in the lab itself, but then the feedback, the experiences, the insights what the patient is giving us, that is going to be something where the drug development process can be modified or tweaked, and then we can have that is where the participants actually get involved in the drug development process. So doctor or pharmacy student. So yes, so patients now, for a pharmacist, and if you are in a role where you are dispensing medicine, or maybe a part of a hospital where the treatment is being given to a patient. So obviously the patient education and educating the patient on how to take the medicine, how to take the treatment, what side effects might be there, what can happen. So pharmacists have a whole lot of role to play here. If it is somebody who's taking a medicine from a drugstore, then the pharmacist, again, they have a big role to play there, where they can tell them about certain, suppose it's a drug which has to be taken empty stomach, and even though doctor would have told them this, but still, if the pharmacist is reinforcing all the factors like this, don't take this empty stomach, or take it first thing in the morning, don't take it at bedtime, or whatever. So whatever is around that drug, and how the treatment has to be taken, or how the treatment has to be implemented, a pharmacist and person who is a pharmacy student, either in the lab, either in the hospital on the wards, or in the pharmacy itself, they have a big role to play, where they kind of, I would say, you become a bridge between the doctor and the patient. So that is kind of important role which I see for anybody who's a doctor or pharmacy student. How do we address the confidentiality and risk of competition concerns in early product development when engaging patients and advocacy groups? So this is one of the challenges, what is there. I think what happens here is we can always sign confidentiality agreements with the patients, and somewhere when you are involving patient in at a early product development stage, I would say the literacy of that, the health literacy of the patient and the research literacy of a patient, that what is the importance of the information that you are providing to them, how significant it is, how critical it is, and why it is important for them not to share this with others. So again, this also becomes a part where you, as we deal with any other situation where we're talking about confidential information. So we have agreement signed, we talk to them in their language what we can understand. We tell them that, if you say it to others who are not actually a part of this activity, then what harm can it do to the whole process and to the whole activity? That is the only thing. And probably when you are getting somebody at an early product development stage, it has to be someone with some experience of being a part of these kind of discussions, being a part of these kind of activities, so that he or she is, more aware of what they are contributing to, and they are serious about their role in it. So if it is a patient whom we are engaging for the first time, who's never done this ever before, I would not, risk involving that patient in an early product development stage. Can patient involvement at pharmaceutical marketing at the launch level help? Yes, it can. It can definitely help at a marketing stage. Probably it would be something like the experiences what they have, what are they talking about, the maybe not the product but about the disease. And if we have all those kind of insights from the patients, then all this can be a part of your communication. It can be a part of your messaging in your during your launch, so that you are hitting the target where it is expected to, and where you are going to get a good response. How does someone begin a medical writing career? So medical writing, obviously you can learn about medical writing. There are certain associations which are there, you can be a part of, you can join our webinars. So we do these webinars almost every month. We're doing it. So if we have your email ID, so whatever we will be sending you the subsequent events what we have our own training programs also. So if you want to enroll in any one of the training programs, you can do that also. So medical writing is somebody who, if you understand science and if you are good with words, medical writing can be a good career option for anyone. How can patient provide expert advice? Okay. So expert advice from a perspective of the product or the disease area or what their experiences is. So they are especially rare diseases. Now you don't have enough patients of a rare disease. A doctor does not see many patients. And maybe they might see one or two patients in a year. So there they become these patients become experts in their own diseases, or if they have some chronic conditions where they have been on a treatment, or where they have been on a therapy for a very long period of time. So then they become expert in what complications can happen, how do they manage it, and give the expert advice from a patient's perspective. Anything else after this? Okay. So we've covered all the questions, and it was good to have all of you today in the session. And you can always maybe reach out to me on LinkedIn, or let me know if you want to know anything more. And it was nice to have all of you. And now thank you so much, and have a lovely week ahead.